Chantal stood on the summit of K2, the savage mountain, and saw nothing. The brutal ultraviolet light had left her completely blind, with zero chance of descending on her own from 28,000 feet. There was no one nearby to help. In despair, she crawled into a snow cave and slowly began to fade. But would anyone dare risk their own life to save the woman climbers called the Black Widow of Alpinism? This is the story of the controversial Frenchwoman, Chantal Mauduit, a woman who always balanced on the razor's edge between life and death. Warning: what follows are facts that may shock you. Her biography could have been the plot of a Hollywood action drama. When Chantal was 5, her parents left Paris and moved closer to the Alps. That's when the little girl first felt a burning passion for mountains. By 15, she was already a serious climber, certified as a mountain guide, and had conquered some of the toughest routes in France. At 22, she placed third in the European Ice Climbing Championships, the only woman among the winners. Soon after, she was invited to join the French National Mountaineering Association, and her name spread quickly in the climbing community. But behind her charming smile hid an unpredictable nature. After summiting Huascarán in the Andes, nearly 22,300 feet, she didn't simply descend. She soared down on a paraglider. One climber was so impressed by the stunt that he invited her to join an Everest expedition. At 27, she made her first attempt on the world's highest peak. It ended in failure, but from that moment on, she swore she would climb only the giants above 8,000 meters. She truly had the skills and endurance. Her body acclimatized quickly, and she could work for long hours in thin air. But there was another factor: her beauty. Attractive, lively, open, and undeniably sensual, she quickly became the center of male attention in every camp. And she used that to her advantage. She enjoyed driving men crazy. Sometimes it went too far. On her second Everest attempt, 2 climbers quarreled over her attention so bitterly that they challenged each other to a duel and started throwing rocks. But Chantal was only interested in men when it suited her. She never carried heavy gear. Her backpack held nothing but a rubber duck, while others shouldered the real weight. Let's do the math. Basic gear alone weighs 20 to 30 pounds. Add clothing and food, and the load grows heavier. And then there are the oxygen tanks. At extreme altitude, the air is so thin the body takes in less and less oxygen. Above 26,000 feet, there's so little of it that the body literally begins dying cell by cell. This zone is known as the death zone. There, you cannot recover strength no matter how long you rest. Hypoxia, freezing cold, and despair slowly destroy the mind. Now picture this. You're an exhausted climber after days of brutal ascent. Frost, snow, endless fatigue. And next to you is someone who shifts their burden onto you simply because they refuse to carry it themselves. Despite her difficult character and selfish habits, Chantal had an incredible hold over men. American climber Thor Kaiser was so enchanted by her that he quickly fell head over heels. And, surprisingly, this time she returned his affection. But Thor had no idea what that love would cost him. One night, they had to sleep directly in the snow. By morning, Thor's feet were badly frostbitten, and he could barely move. He decided to descend to fetch his sleeping bag. Chantal gave him only one short request: bring mine too. Still blinded by love, he obediently did as she asked. On the way back, Thor met Alexei Nikiforov, who joined them and continued the climb. After another exhausting night out in the open, all 3 finally reached Camp 4. Before dawn, a weakened Thor broke trail through knee-deep snow, with Chantal and Alexei following behind. Every step in that high-altitude wasteland demanded brutal effort. Just 200 meters from the summit, Thor realized he was completely spent. His only chance of survival was to turn back immediately. Chantal tried to convince him to push on, but he refused. That decision saved his life and ultimately sealed the fate of the entire group. Chantal and Alexei kept climbing. At exactly 5 p.m. on August 3rd, Chantal stood on the summit of K2, triumphant and completely blind. During the ascent, she had lost her sunglasses. The blinding reflection of the snow burned her corneas, and now she could barely see. No partner, no radio, no chance of descending alone. Disoriented and terrified, she stumbled into a small snow cave left by other climbers. But this was no rescue, it was a tomb in waiting. Without a stove, the cold drained her remaining strength. The death zone was doing its work. Cell by cell, her body was shutting down. It looked like the end. But on his way down from the summit, Alexei found her. He couldn't leave her behind. Even though her hands and feet were frostbitten, she was half-conscious and kept falling asleep on her feet. Getting someone down from K2 in that condition is nearly impossible. Every step risks your own death. And the most dangerous section still lay ahead. The bottleneck, a narrow passage under massive hanging ice seracs that could collapse at any moment. But even that wasn't the greatest problem. The slope there reaches nearly 60 degrees. Without ropes, descending is almost certain death. And Alexei not only had to descend, he had to drag half-conscious Chantal with him. The worst part? He had left his rope on the way to the summit. But as fate would have it, Thor had picked it up earlier. On his descent, he anchored it at the bottleneck to help Chantal on her way back down. That rope saved their lives. Alexei managed to clip in, but as soon as he started down, one of his crampons snapped off. He lost his balance and began sliding straight toward the abyss. Only the taut rope Thor had left stopped his fall in time. When Alexei finally reached Camp 4, he could barely stand. Altitude sickness, exhaustion, and the cold had nearly finished him off. He collapsed inside Thor's tent, and Thor himself was half dead after so many hours in the death zone. At some point, Alexei had abandoned Chantal, leaving her to descend alone. Thor was furious, but helpless. He knew that if he went searching, he would never return. 45 minutes later, Chantal appeared on the slope, staggering forward with her arms outstretched like a blind woman or a sleepwalker. Thor dragged her inside, rubbed her frozen legs, and gave her warm drinks. But there was no real relief. In the death zone, the body doesn't recover, it only continues to weaken. 3 days passed. Thor understood there was no more time. They tried to descend, but in 3 hours managed barely 200 feet. Exhausted, Thor began setting up a new tent. Alexei, without a word, kept going down on his own. He had left Chantal's survival entirely on Thor's shoulders, even though Thor was too weak to save himself. The next morning, Thor managed to radio for help. He called on 2 famous climbers, Ed Viesters and Scott Fisher. They confirmed they were on their way, and Thor finally felt a small spark of relief. But he had no idea what awaited them just after they left camp. Roped together, Ed and Scott started the climb. Suddenly, Ed felt the hair on his arms stand on end, pure instinct warning of deadly danger. He threw himself into the snow, confusing Scott. A second later, Scott understood why. An avalanche was coming straight at them. Ed dove into a small hollow, but Scott was swept away. The rope between them yanked Ed out of his shelter, and he too was dragged down the slope. In desperation, he swung his ice axe into solid ice, and by pure luck, it stopped him just a few yards before the cliff edge. They survived. They shook the snow off, caught their breath, and still kept going. When they finally reached Thor and Chantal, both were at death's door. The descent took 2 grueling days. And then, astonishingly, near the end it was Chantal who revived. She even managed to walk on her own. Down at base, the scene was completely different. She was welcomed as a triumphant heroine, basking in the attention of men. Her only story, she had reached the summit, and her eyes hurt. Nothing more. For Thor, it was like a knife to the heart. Alexei spoke up as well. He claimed Chantal hadn't truly reached the top, but officially, her summit was still recognized. That's when her notorious nickname took root in the climbing community, the Black Widow. Everyone realized this woman was willing to gamble with other people's lives just to achieve her own goals. When she was handed a fine for illegally joining a Swiss expedition, she simply tore up the paper and threw it in the official's face. The scandals only fueled her fame. She kept finding money for new expeditions, and with each one, she became an even more controversial figure in mountaineering. She tried to conquer Everest more than once, and every time she failed. In 1995, she joined the expedition of the legendary Rob Hall, a member of the Order of the British Empire, who already held the record with 5 ascents of the world's highest peak. But once again, Chantal became a problem. She was the slowest in the team, constantly holding everyone back. At around 28,700 feet, her lips turned blue, her eyes lost focus. Hall ordered her to descend immediately. She agreed, took a few steps, and collapsed unconscious. Once again, other climbers had to risk their own lives to pull her back from the edge. Among them was Ed Viesters, saving her for the second time. And once again, she recovered with shocking speed. The very next day, she was laughing and joking in camp, as if nothing had happened. An enraged Rob Hall announced he would never take her on his expeditions again. Ironically, that decision saved her life. The following year, Hall led another group on Everest and perished alongside Scott Fisher in the tragic 1996 storm. That same season, Chantal set her sights on the neighboring peak, Lhotse. She claimed she had reached the summit, but offered no proof. Given her reputation, most climbers didn't believe her. The final chapter of her story came in 1998. Together with her friend, Ongcharing Sherpa, she stayed in Camp 2 on Dhaulagiri. Italian climbers descending from above warned them about a dangerous crevasse higher on the route. Chantal thanked them and shut herself inside the tent. When the same Italians returned 5 days later, they found the tent half buried in snow. Inside were the lifeless bodies of Chantal and the Sherpa. Her neck was broken. He had suffocated. It's believed an ice block collapsed on them, but no one saw it happen. What really took place remains a mystery. For climbers who knew Chantal well, it was no surprise. She had always ignored the rules, acting as if the laws of nature did not apply to her. But the mountains do not forgive arrogance. So who is Chantal Mauduit? The Black Widow who destroyed everything around her, or a gifted mountaineer, consumed by a thirst for absolute freedom?